how do I kind of catalyze what I want out of this event? How do I jumpstart it? How do I get it really moving through the event and getting people believing, seeing, feeling, and sort of understanding things a little bit different? What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Event Marketing Redefined. I am your host, Matt Kleinrock, CEO of Rockway Exhibits and Events. Today, we have a very cool show for you today. We are going to talk with a creative about narrative experience design and really try to work on talking with everybody about building kind of like emotional connection with your audience at your events, at your trade shows, at your activations, and just hear more from the creative perspective. So Theron, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this. I want you to give us, just give us a quick 30 seconds on you, what you've done, and your background to frame it for everybody listening, please.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on the show. It's a real pleasure to be here. Well, let's see, probably the most significant part of my working career was 23 years that I spent with Walt Disney Imagineering. That's probably the employer, the company background that most people would probably know me from. I did spend some time in film, and now I've been on my own for 5 years running my own business. But I've been in the themed entertainment industry, is what you'd call it, for 30 plus years. What's fascinating about that and how it applies to your audience, I think we're going to talk about it a little bit more, is that I deduced that experience into the practice that I now have, which is called narrative experience design. And that works really, really well for brands who especially have a physical destination.
Awesome. Let's do it. I love that. I think that's a great setup. So I always have goals when I'm doing a podcast. I love making sure that our audience, which is, primarily corporate event marketers, we do have some industry people that listen as well. We have a mix, but I try to drive as much value to the corporate event marketer and the eventor, the eventier, people listening. So I want to make sure we really talk today about storytelling, right? I want to make sure that we talk about building that kind of like emotional connection for the audience. And when they leave an activation or event, it leaves them, being told the story that you wanted and feeling the way that you wanted, right? So talk to me a little bit about story and the importance of story in person at a face-to-face event, activation, whatever it may be.
Right, absolutely. First, I'd probably like to clarify or maybe clear up a misconception about story. This isn't what you sit down and read your kids at night before they go to bed. It's not the audible that you listen to on the way to work. Those are, of course, stories. Games, streaming, television, movies, they're all founded by story framework. The kind of story narrative that I'm referring to comes out of a client's brand, the core meaning of their brand, who they are, why they exist, not to make money, not because we have service X or we make product Y. It's the reason that it was started. Those are the stories that you tell. And the cool thing about events is, my goodness, that's the penultimate, right, of a brand, because you're there in person and your booth, your presence as a company has to be concisely represented visually and any other sensory information that you provide. It has to be captured there. And like a billboard on the side of the road that you drive by at 60 miles an hour, it has to grab you and it has to tell everything that you want the passerby to understand about your brand within seconds. It's a high stakes game of distilling elements out of the brand, representing them in a physical space in a way that makes an emotional connection with the attendees of that event, right? And that's not easy to do, but it's fun to do.
Agreed. It's funny listening to you, talk about this and kind of begin to articulate it. What it gets me thinking is something that I tell people all the time, which is essentially that in my eyes, events are a catalyst. That face-to-face, that in-person, that experience, the connection, the being there together, experiencing something together, experience a brand in person. To me, I think companies, organizations undervalue how much of a catalyst it is for pipeline, for relationship building, for what people would consider brand awareness. But using the word catalyst to me always gets me thinking, like, how do I kind of catalyze what I want out of this event? How do I jumpstart it? How do I get it really moving through the event and getting people believing, seeing, feeling, and sort of understanding things a little bit different? So walk me through, when you say narrative experience design, walk us through a little bit of what you mean by that and exactly what you're saying.
Absolutely. Well, as a practice, I generally start with the client's brand, right? A deep
Yeah.
understanding of their brand. And that's beyond just mission, objectives, goals, that kind of thing. It really goes to the heart of what the brand is. For example, I worked with a 52-year-old retail brand that was a family brand, started by the grandfather, passed down to the father, and now it was going, to the children in this 2.5 to 3 generations. And when we sat down and talked about this, we were really talking about their core values as a family, why they started it, how they maintain the consistency of those brand elements, right? So first, a deep understanding of the client's brand. Second is, who's your customer, right? Defining who shops with you, who interacts with you, who engages with you. That's beyond just a demographic, but who do you engage with now, and who do you want to engage with? Third and final piece of that is business objectives. Whether I'm working on a project for a client or the client is reimagining a phase of their business, maybe they're starting a business from the ground up and they're building a brand. Those three elements, brand, customer, and business objectives, those are the three core elements, but I don't just stop there. Here's where the story comes in. Story is developed to embody all three of those elements. And story itself, that narrative element, becomes the mechanism that delivers on all three of those things, grows brand equity, grows an audience, establishes brand loyalty, delivers on quarterly returns, shareholder value, et cetera, et cetera. Story is not something that you write and paint on. It's the core elements that represent the DNA of the client.
Love that. That's a really good breakdown. I want to drift away from this for 1 second just to ask you a question that I'm selfishly dying to know, but that is, what's the coolest project you worked on at Disney from a creative standpoint? Like, what did you work on? I'm not a creative per se, but I work on creative things. I come up with ideas. I think through them with my teams. There are some that I really just love, and I know that I'll always remember them, and I get like invigorated by them per se, right? Like the ideas and what we're doing. So what was that for you at Disney?
This is a question I get frequently.
Yeah.
And I find it equally as impossible to answer now as the first time I was asked. Maybe just a quick 2-second background for your audience. As a creative executive with the company, my role was basically as a conductor, right? So I oversaw large, very diverse, cross-disciplinary teams. And our whole objective was literally to create new destinations, new physical spaces for the company. That was, in my case, attractions, theme parks, hotels, all what Disney would call in berm, so within a theme park. But I did quite a lot of work out of berm, which was urban design in the form of retail dining and entertainment. And I also worked quite a lot in the Disney Cruise Line. That was my last role.
I was just on a Disney Cruise Line 3 weeks ago.
Oh, very cool. Which ship were you on?
I was on, what was it? We did Wish last time, and then this time we did Treasure. Is it Treasure or
Adventure?
I forget. No. We did the Wish is the new one. We did the Wish last time, and then this was more the conventional. One of the conventional ones went to Mexico.
Probably Dream
and
or Fantasy then.
Dream. Yes, Dream. Awesome.
It's all Disney
Great cruises.
So that was my last role, was the creative lead for
Nice.
Cruise Line and the new ships and the new Bahamian destination. So that's just context. So the coolest thing that I think I've worked on, and again, it changes, but now I would say that was Disney Springs. I was the creative executive that led that. It was a 4-year project. And what was interesting is it holds a place for me as the most complex, difficult project I ever worked on. But I think one of the most rewarding, because there were so many firsts for the company that they hadn't done before. And it was at a scale that we just hadn't tackled as a company before. Really, really interesting stuff. And we couldn't, as a creative team, rely on any of the elements and processes that we use when we design within the theme park. We had to kind of reinvent that. And I don't know, that made it really interesting.
And Disney Springs is fantastic. It's about 10 minutes from my office. So, we've done a lot of stuff there, dinners and things of that nature. So
lunches.
Nice. Yeah. Nice work. All right. Let's go back to, as you broke down narrative experience design, two of the things that I think of when it comes to events that are conversations that we're having regularly is two things. I'll phrase them. One is themes, and the other is what I call the big idea. This is two things that I think a lot of companies are looking for when they're going to go design, build a trade show booth and deploy it, when they're going to put on their own host event, right? When they're going to go activate. They want the big idea. right? And they want a theme and a vibe and a whole encompassed kind of experience.
Right.
What I find, having done this now for 14 years, is that too many companies put the cart ahead of the horse, and they just get in a room and they just start throwing shit against the wall for back of letter term and say, this would be cool, this would be cool. And I am constantly trying to pull the conversation back to a more strategic approach. What is your take on themes specifically when it comes to events, experiences?
You definitely don't want to be in a situation as a company or as a brand where the tail is wagging the dog, as you said. It doesn't take a lot of effort for any company, any size, any global segment of the economy to go hire a firm and say, come up with a cool idea. Happens every day. Billions of dollars are spent doing that. The question that I would have for that CEO, that CMO or CFO is that theme going to move your business? One. Two, is it consistent with the message of your brand? Because if it's not, I mean, what are you doing? It's just wasted. It might raise some eyebrows. It might get some people stopping by your booth, grabbing handfuls of mints and the 10,000 pins that you purchased. But how is it moving the needle with building emotional engagement and real audience members? That's my whole objective coming out of Disney, starting my own firm and helping venture capitalists, helping companies, helping governments, is moving customers into audience members. How do you make that transformation? Because last time I checked, you can't have fans in a customer group or a customer demographic, right? Those are audience members. They follow you because they love what you do, not what you make. They love who you are. So my challenge, passionate challenge, and my plea with companies is don't do what company A and B did last year because it was cool and they got a lot of hits. Do the research yourself. Find somebody who can help you uncover the hidden gems, the differentiators within your brand that is only your brand, and bring those things to life in an emotionally engaging way that differentiates you from everybody else on the floor. That, I think, is where the real magic is.
I like that you said that because it's kind of a bit of a leading question, which is essentially that I've been working on this for a while and with companies and trying to help them do this. And I have a bit of a marketing background. I built a business. I know events. I'm just kind of like blending my life at this point together
It's
to
fun,
figure
isn't
out
it?
to figure out how to do this stuff right. But one thing that we've deployed, and I'd love to check this with you right now and see what you think about it, is when companies are coming to us and they want to talk to us about a big idea or a theme, or even just doing something experiential or conceptual to a degree. Some of my main questions when I go to them, I have a little bit of a checklist. I just want to run you through. One is things I want to, yes, I want their brand guide and their brand and all that stuff, right? But what I start thinking about is what's your value proposition to the customer? What is the problem that you solve for the customer? Does your company have a point of view, right? Like a very strong narrative type of point of view. A lot of companies have a purpose or a cause that they're led by. Do you have any major differentiators, right? So as I go down this list, to me, not every company is going to have every single one of these things that lines up, but I'm looking for a thread. I'm looking for a thread in there that matters to their audience. And then from there, that is typically the thread that we start to pull on and explore with them. So I'd love your thoughts from Rockway, from our creative standpoint. What do you think of that?
I think it's right on the money.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
I
So I
think it's
was
great.
hoping you weren't like, what?
Well, you should quit immediately. No.
Yeah,
I think that's right on the money.
that's good.
I think that all of those, you could go deep with those as opposed to being superficial. My assumption is you meant that, the deeper dive. Oftentimes I do a practice. I learned this a long time ago. I call it swimming upstream. I never sit across from a client and the client slides a disk or a terabyte drive at me and says, here's our program. If it's a restaurant, it's this many seats, it's this kind of kitchen, it's this type of food, blah, blah, blah. I never just take what they give me because it's their language, their vernacular, their understanding, right? So I like to dive deeper. So I'm assuming you do that. If somebody says, here's our purpose, here's our objective, here's those things, I'm assuming you qualify those things. The other thing that I would say, which is I totally believe is gold, what would have been considered normal 20, even 30 years ago, probably even 15 years ago, things like authenticity, an authentic message, consistency, right?
Yeah.
Real customer service. I mean, real customer service, not pulling up to a drive-through and getting stuff thrown at you. Those three things alone In the 50s, that was everybody did that, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at the groups that pay for everything right now, millennials and Gen Z, that's what they're looking for is consistency.
Yeah.
If they buy a pair of shoes in an REI co-op, just picking on them because they're really cool,
Yeah.
they fit
Yeah.
good, they climb the rock wall, they had a good time with the brand ambassador, buy them, put them in a bag, go home. They have a problem, they pick up the phone, they call, they get a call center in Manila. These people perhaps were never trained, and it
Yeah.
absolutely erodes the brand
Yeah.
experience that they had. Happened to me. This is my story. I brought the
Yeah.
shoes back and I said, I'm not going to buy from you. Your brand
Yeah.
experience was so inconsistent, it just eroded it all the way down. So everything that you said, right on, dig into it. It's great.
Yeah.
But I think you can really leverage those others and truly differentiate because not too many people are able to deliver on that these days.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah. I mean, I think those are some of the things that it make me think is that when you go to be in person, right? And this concept of telling your story, but really it's making sure somebody understands from a corporate standpoint who you are. You know, it's trying to find a way to really relay that message. What's one thing when you've seen people sort of engage in experiential ideas, right? Could be any kind of event. What's one of the big like misunderstandings, or what's one of the downfalls that maybe you see that, you know, people who are listening could avoid?
I would say in this case, size doesn't matter, right? How many different
Yeah, I
trade
love
shows
that.
and events you've been to,
Yeah.
and you see this, 3 acre, I'm making it up for
Yeah.
exaggeration, 3 acre booth that somebody dropped, 6 figures for, and it's mostly carpet and some chairs and
Yeah.
some, booth
Hmm.
wingding set really cool with lighting. That is not
Yeah.
nearly as important as what you create, what you dimensionally represent has to be within seconds representative of the core essence of your brand. That's colors, that's form language, that's sensory information, that's the consistency of all the brand representatives. How many companies do you work with, Matt, that actually have a full briefing with every single employee that's going to be on the floor? And they really go through almost like a training, a passionate, like
Hmm.
a coach would before you go out to the game, really
Yeah.
talking about it. I can tell you from my experience, all of the employees get there, set it up, pamphlets, mints, t-shirts, pens,
Yeah.
whatever. And then the C-suite rolls in the day of with their briefcases and sits in the back. That's not the way to run the thing.
Agreed.
Consistency that everybody is aligned, an ecosystem that fully represents what your booth is representing in a physical way. All the people need to also embody that themselves.
We call that a game day playbook, right? Which is essentially this idea of like, how do you get everything into 3, 4 pages? And whether you're hosting an event, whether it's a trade show booth where you're activating with a big team, everybody has to know what's going on. They have to know the message. They have to know why you're there. They have to know what the goals, the objectives, at what point in time during the day are we going to meet and talk about what's happening, leads. There's so much that goes into that game day, but I love what you're saying about having everybody on the same page, because I do find that there are a lot of companies where, the event or the trade show just becomes very routine to them versus really treating it like a little bit with kid gloves, right? And really treating it like this unique experience that they're trying to deliver to their customer.
What's a recovery methodology? Right now, this is from the hotel world, right? Lodging world is guest recovery in that sense, right? If you walk up to a trade show booth, you don't have an appointment, you're just interested. So whatever they did works and it draws you in. And hey, I'm just interested in what you guys do. And the person basically says, here's a pamphlet. Or, my boss is in a meeting right now and you can come back in 10 minutes. That's the death blow, right? You just
I agree.
never ever do that. But you see that all the time. And so, again, that consistency, remembering that our primary customer right now is in a demographic that favors experiences over things. Every single company, every single brand, every client, every C-suite member needs to be dialed into this fact, because those that aren't, frankly, are going to end up like Sears or Toys R Us. It's just going to happen because the power of making that emotional connection, I really believe is the power of the future of these brands.
You know what's funny? When you were saying that, what it makes me think, when it comes to events, and I'm a stickler on this type thing with my team and just our discussions, which is, to me, experience comes down to the details, which is what I think you were really describing. You could come up with the greatest visuals and the coolest ideas, but I think through, like when someone arrives to the hotel and when they get to here and they're going to there, and does it make sense? Does it add up? Is it seamless for them? And that really is experience. I'd love to hear you talk about those details, right? Because you've designed, been a part of so many different places, from attractions to Disney Spring, all these different things. So what do you think about when you think about the details of an experience? I think our audience would really appreciate that side of it because it's a lot of what they do in their planning.
Perfect. And thanks for the question.
Yeah,
When I look, I think of this in terms, and it's probably just because of my experience, I think of this in terms of a physical location, like an attraction, for example.
sure.
There's so many elements that go into the physicality of an attraction, the building, the ride system, the sequence at which, or the timing at which things unfold. And I'm sure your audience visualizes what I'm talking about. Maybe they're going
Hmm.
through their favorite attraction in their mind and they're thinking about
Hmm.
that. That is hugely detailed and not unlike the process that an exhibit manufacturer or designer would go through, right? Less obviously, it's not a ride system, so less detailed, but you're still going to be thinking about those things. Lighting matters, signage matters, form, shape, materiality, all of those things. But one thing that I always really talk about, because I think a lot of people, especially in themed entertainment, on the design side, forget about is there's a whole nother component to that experience, not just the physical elements, right? If you walked into Disneyland, you would see this beautiful place. But if there weren't cast members, if there weren't brand representatives in there that you as a guest can stop and talk to, the space doesn't come alive in the same way. So I would say the same thing to your audience members. There's the physical place that you're building, but then there's also the employees, the brand ambassadors that make that physical place come to life. And they can either win it or lose it, right? They can just destroy the experience, or they can really lift it and level up the experience in a way that none of the physical elements really can. That's why I said what I said earlier is there's a million ways to get your booth designed or your logo designed or your website designed,
Hmm.
but there aren't too many companies that I find that consistently reinvest in their people. And that's not just a better head of HR. That's establishing not just a culture, but a list of human habits that embody the brand story that you're trying to tell. If your employees love it first, then all of your audience members, of course, are going to love it.
I love that you said that. My company hosts an invitation only. It's roughly a 30-person event that we
Mhm.
host every single year. It's actually coming up here in a month. It's some of our clients, some are not clients, but they're all like high level event marketers, all directors of events at corporate companies. And I remember last year when we had launched this event, and I remember talking to my team prior. We were really working on our playbook, our interaction, the experience, the depth of the detail. And the one thing that I kept pounding in everybody's head is we created this event for the event marketer because we found through doing our podcast and talking to our customers and just being curious with our customer that event marketers were really, really seeking peer to peer, authentic
Mm.
knowledge share, think tank, and interaction. They're tired of being sold at events. They're tired of being chased and run down. They're
Right.
tired of being spoken to keynote after keynote. They want to get together and talk and work. So I kept telling them that's what this event is. In a way, I was like, stay. I was saying to them at times, stay out of the way, or connect and enhance what they're doing. That's it. Like that's all that we're doing over these 3 days. And I think my team took it so seriously, which I greatly appreciated. But at the end of the event, we had people like, what about you guys? What do you guys like? Because we were so focused on them, but the experience overly worked because of that level of detail. We're like, we want to give them 2.5 days where they feel like this whole thing is catered to exactly what they want.
What I love to also infuse, just food for thought, and it's probably where I came from, but the reality is that people like to escape and play. Now, what do I mean by escape, right? It basically take a little bit of a mini vacation mentally and emotionally from all the cares and pressures of your own world. That could be your job,
Yeah.
it could be, I don't know, whatever you put in there. And people love the excuse, the to be given permission to play. And oftentimes it's
Yeah.
playing with a group, right? It doesn't matter if it's throwing axes or darts or having a
Yeah.
beer
Having
or
fun.
golfing or
Yeah.
whatever. And so why can't we make events more gamified, more fun, interactive?
Yeah. Agreed.
There are great ways to take subjects, whether it's a brand or whether it's a segment of the global economy, and do something that where people can interact together, but make it really fun. When people are disarmed like that and they're having fun, man, you'd be so surprised at how much they remember from that experience.
I love that. I love that you said that because I think one note on this, and I want to skip to your framework a little bit. I want to go into it a bit. I think people really throw that term. I love how you said, sorry, people like to escape and play. I wrote that down. I really love it because it's so true. They like to escape and play and be given a reason like, oh, we're here. We're going to do this fun thing. And then it becomes experience where, and then you use the term when we were talking, you're talking gamification. And I feel like my industry has beat the dead horse body on gamification, but it's not in that people like to escape and play well. It's, oh, we want to engage them some way to get them to buy something. So we're going to make a Jeopardy game like, I love the thought, the authenticity of your audience wants to escape and play. How can you creatively curate that for them and make it matter? I think it's a
Yeah.
great point. Love that
Absolutely.
you
A,
said
a
that.
key point on that too, Matt, just 2 seconds, is that you can't really create an environment of, surprise and delight,
Hmm.
this idea of play and authenticity until you solve some of the big things first, right? You
Hmm.
got to make
Yeah.
things like registration easy, travel to and from your hotel to the
Yeah.
event.
No one wants to have fun when it's a pain in the ass. I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Well, we consider that in my world
Yeah.
to be frictionless, right? If you can
Yeah.
remove frictions, if you can lower those barriers, if you make wayfinding easy, once all that is taken care of operationally,
Hmm.
transactionally, if the time has been spent to do that, then you've kind of earned the trust in a sense
Yeah.
where you
Mhm.
can then open up environments and really play and be fun because people aren't hitting the floor ticked off because there was so
Yeah.
much friction in the process to get there.
Love it. That's a great way to put it. Talk to me a little bit about your framework, right? If you could take us through sort of how it works. I mean, give us a step by step. I'd love for event marketers and people listening to this to be able to take bits and pieces of it for themselves and apply it, to different things that they're doing. And I also would love for them to understand what it really looks like to go through this process.
Absolutely. Well, I mentioned to you already before that the first step in my process is a deep dive with a client and their brand, really understanding who they are and the meaning of what they're bringing to the table in their company. It's the Simon Sinek start with why. It's the
Yeah.
core meaning. It's not what you do, it's not how you do it, it's why are you doing it. I know it sounds cliche, but that is the truth. I've had great success with that because it gets people to think about the gray area. Everything we're talking about here in
Yeah.
experiences are grays. And that's why
Yes.
CFOs get so frustrated because it's very hard to quantify. But that is where a customer lives, is in this experience. They use emotions to make decisions. And what are emotions unless they're experience driven? So as a brand, if you can drive a connection with an experience emotionally, then you've really got something there. So I move on to understanding the customer, as I said, the customer base. Who are we talking about and the business objectives? Once I have that, then I really am working to fashion a story that delivers on those. And we can make up some ideas here. I would ask the client, let's say they're a family brand, they're in fashion apparel, and they primarily have a customer that's female, right?
Mhm.
Just giving you some illustration points,
Yeah.
right? Well, that automatically you begin to think of a color palette, a form language, again, because you have to translate those things into a physical representation of that. Whether you're starting from zero and you're building the brand, or the brand exists for X number of years, you still need to understand that. And I think that helps you to, it's a process I call dimensionalizing brand, right? You interpret all of these metaphorical descriptions about the brand, about the brand's customer, what they want to do, their goals and everything. And you
Hmm.
have to distill and extrapolate that into what would a physical environment look like? One. Two, you also interpret that into a language. How would you speak about this brand? Are there consistent
Yeah.
ways of talking, ways of describing? The end of the
Is
day,
it serious? Is it playful? Is it fun? Like, is there
exactly,
different? I got you.
exactly.
Yeah.
So the place that I was going to go is the result is, I like to look at a brand's touch points, right? That could be social media, it could be a website, it could be flagship location, you fill in the blank, whatever, however customers engage with that brand, that's what I would call a touch point. Once you've discovered the essence of the story, that story is used to create an emotional engagement for every single touch point, right? The training manual and the system that you would develop for frontline cast members or frontline employees, sorry, my Disney slipped out there, that program, that would be different than the approach that you would use to train call center employees,
Yeah.
or that'd be different than the approach that you would use to design a flagship store. But all that comes back to the core that you've discovered from that brand essence. What you get out of that is a consistency across every single touch point. Now the CMO, now the CFO, CEO can look at results. And because you've now designed on every single touch point what those experiences should be like. How many companies do you know that actually do that?
I don't know. I don't know many at all. As you were talking, one thing that I thought about was because we have a lot of these conversations, maybe not at the depth of what you would be working on with a customer from ground zero, but we're working on it as a portion of the way they're deploying themselves at their events. I think, you had said that customers use emotion to make decisions, which I think is absolutely true. So then that gets my brain turning like, well, what kind of emotion are you going to elicit from your customer when
Right.
you have a face-to-face experience? I think sometimes when people hear the word emotion, they think it's kind of like foofy, kind of bullshit, honestly, like
Yeah.
out in the clouds, this emotional feeling.
The
But I
thing we
don't,
say.
yeah, like I push back on that notion so much because I've been to events, I've been to brand experiences, I've created ones that are geared towards me, ones that are we've created for others. I've done both sides of the coin. I think there's so many emotions that go through. Like when you go to a brand's event or a brand's trade show booth or activation, I immediately pass judgment on them instantly. Your brain is
Can't help it.
passing a yeah, your brain is passing a judgment. And I think that is part of the emotion that when you're in there,
Yeah.
I've gone to restaurants where the decor, it intrigues me. It's, and I'm like, really just enjoy the setting. I've gone to places where, you walk in there and it just looks like they could kind of care less about any of that. And I'm like, well, do they care about this? Your brain just starts working. So I think really reverse engineering and working backwards on what that emotion is that you want to elicit is so important. It's the true, by you saying that customers use emotion to make decisions, I think you have to factor it in when, you're putting an event on or you're doing a trade show booth.
Absolutely. I would maybe rephrase it and just say it this way to the CEOs, CFOs, CMOs, CXOs that may be tuning in, or your event managers, event creators, is if you haven't specifically designed, created, and built and trained for a particular range of experiences, then you're just hoping that they happen.
Yeah.
That's a big
Yeah.
deal. And that's the olden days way to do something,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you
Yeah.
build it, they'll come. Well, they can come.
It's not.
But if you
Yeah.
don't train them,
What are they going to think? Yeah.
you can't guarantee
Yeah.
that they're going to have a good experience. That's the question that I love to ask CFOs is, can you guarantee that every customer that engages with your brand will have a positive experience? And they
Yeah.
usually cross their arms and guffaw and say, that can't be done. You can't guarantee it. And I always say, would you like to be way more sure, 80% more sure than you
Mm-hmm.
are now that all those experiences are positive? He says yes. She says yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you
Yeah.
design them, if you design for a certain outcome, if you strategically plan for a certain outcome, and then you manage to that plan, then those plans usually are the ones that happen. It's the exact same thing with an experience. Yes, it's the gray zone. Yes, you can't control the attitude or the day that your customer had, but you can
Mm-hmm.
empower the people that run your business to adaptively deal with that with the single goal of bringing about the right atmosphere for those kinds of emotions to take place.
Yeah. You know what it makes me think? It's putting myself in a bit of a different seat than I normally am when I'm working with clients on their own stuff. It makes me think, we exhibited, I mean, We exhibited back in 23 once, and a lot of our competitors were on the trade show floor. And I mean, in my eyes, I mean, this is what we do. We design, we build, right? So you have to show up. You just do, right? And I remember going around the show floor and looking at what some of our competitors had done. I mean, we had spent a lot of time thinking about the message, what we were going to deliver, creative, what it visually looks like, the experience when people come over, what our engagements look like. We actually ran our podcast in the booth and invited people in and did live sessions. It was a blast. But I remember seeing some of our competitors and just thinking to myself, like, man, do they even care? Or
Yeah.
right? Not talk poorly of them, but just thinking of the emotion it elicited from me.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Whereas I saw some of the other competitors and I was like, man, like, and they put some time into this. Like, this is what we do. If we can't do it for ourselves to go showcase to our customer, how could I ever think if I was a customer that we could do it for them?
That's right.
And I think that happens to people. Like, if you're just showing up just to show up, I mean, my advice is stop. It's like reconsider how. I think you can make very small tweaks to show up better if you really want to. And when you're in person, I just 100% believe that you should.
Yeah, I think that there's an opportunity, especially in events. That's every event, leisure,
Yes.
marketing, travel marketing. I think, and some of them are way more boring than others, as I know you know, is to rethink every aspect of it, right? Now, this is probably from my time at Disney, and a lot of my clients now are always about innovation, innovation, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? And so I always try to rethink everything. Just because something exists, the giveaways, the pins, all the stuff that's out there, is there something different you can do? Can you spend your money in a different way? If you were to look at what they call the hero's journey, right, which is the core configuration of storytelling, an element of that called the artifact of the journey. Think about this when you go hiking, right? You pick up a rock and you bring it home, even though maybe you're not supposed to. It represents your journey. You remember the mountains. You same with the shell on the beach. It's the exact same principle at a booth. What you pick up needs to fully embody and represent your emotional connection with the brand that you visited. If it's your 45th pin, so I would challenge, the industry to think differently about these things so you can drive different results.
Love that. I want to see if kind of to wrap this up, I want to see if I can get, because I've got your head hopefully in a little bit of the space of what like the corporate event marketer does and what they're working on, right? From trade show booths to host events to executive dinners to brand activations to this array. Say your daughter, your son, your niece, your nephew, whomever, mid-late 20s, just getting a corporate job at a company, let's call it a software company, and they're taking on an event role where they're planning and coordinating and they're working on the event side of things. And they call you and they're like, hey, I know you have experience in a similar-ish space and I really want to do great work. What would be like 3 directional things? What would be the advice that you would give them?
I think I know a little bit about the industry, and my first bit of advice was start early and plan, right?
Yeah.
Starting, a month or 2 months before the event is not giving yourself enough runway. And don't assume that it's easy. It's a well-established brand. We've been around for X years. We have all this collateral. I can draw on all these existing things and repurpose them in different ways. I can put this on a mug, I can put this on a shirt, etc. I would really invite that individual to take an opportunity to rethink the way that they've done it, right? I'm not a sports fan, but I'll use a sports analogy and I apologize in advance for it, right? But if you're going to go play a game, typically you'll watch the quote game tapes or game films, they said, of how does your competitors, how do they do things? How does the other team play? I would do a ton of research to see how all of the top players in your particular market are doing it, and look at if you can get the information on startups and what's new and what's fresh out there, and then look at adjacent markets. What have other people done that really made an impact, right? People sleeping outside of an Apple store to get a consumer electronic. I can tell you, nobody planned on that, right? And that was a complete emergent thing that just happened. So it's really important to understand human emotion and understand what humans go for and understanding your audience. So that's what I would recommend. And especially if you're planning, You're not just a brand that's creating a booth to exhibit, but you're managing the entire event and creating it from scratch. Boy, you have a really big opportunity to make an impact across a wide variety of experiences.
Love that you said that because I think there's a lot in this industry. There is, you're saying rethink the way it's being done, right? Don't just settle for what's in front of you and kind of the way it's always been done. And essentially, there's a lot of that in events. It's a lot of rinse and repeat. We've always done it this way. We've always gone to this show. So I think having fresh eyes and newer people or anybody working in it to come at it, I'm always pushing event managers and marketers to try to understand the business side of it.
Yeah.
So a whole nother world to these events and understanding those pieces.
I would suggest, and the client that I'm working with right now, I just have all this fresh market research, so it's fresh in my mind. But Gen Z especially is looking for fourth space connections. They're looking for ways to create their own kind of gathering. So instead of having this prescribed itinerary, this at 8, this at 9, this at 10, why not create a range of things that can be curated so you can create your own experiences? I mean, there's so much study in tangential industries that I think could lend themselves very well, all the way to like WeWork spaces, or what are millennials, how are they playing? What kind of events and things are they doing that they're going to in droves? What kind of movie theaters are people going to now? The AMCs and the Regals of the world are crashing and burning, but little boutique theaters are now springing up everywhere. There's just so many different adjacent markets that can feed into this, because it's about making an emotional connection and really engaging with humans. And there's other brands and other companies and other markets that are doing a really, really good job that you can learn from and adapt that kind of design and integrated gathering metrics into a space like a big event.
Just saying that it is all about just engaging with humans and making an emotional connection it hits back on what you were saying earlier about really understanding your audience, and it is diving into who are they. Yeah. And I tell people all the time, like, don't just give us some ICP profile. Like, I want to know, I say engineers are different than executives and HR people are different than salespeople. And you just start they have different tendencies. They tend to be in mass, different kinds of people. So really curating and dialing into who that audience is, what they like, what they don't like, what brings them together. We just all those type of conversations. I think that is where the engaging with the humans at an events becomes really fun, because you're kind of using the tricks of the trade to understand how to orchestrate this whole thing really, really well.
Totally. Creating, if it's possible, those awe moments of wonder. At Disney, we called them surprise and delight. Disney Springs, we created their preview center. And I took the approach that, look, the audience that I know is coming to this preview center are potential, lots and lots of brands, potential tenants, food, beverage, entertainment, all kinds of things. And these are your property developers, right? They've seen it all. They've been there. So we started with a white model, which they've seen a million times. They came in, we started talking. What they didn't expect is that we painted the entire model with light, projected light, and we turned a white model into this magical animated place, like watching a little animated village with music and sound effects. Every single one of those starched executives, male and female, old and young, turned into seventh graders instantly. Yeah. They ripped out their phones. Oh my God, I can't believe it. That's an awesome thing.
That's cool.
So I just say that as an example where your event planners, if they can think through opportunities to produce wonder and awe and something that is totally unexpected, you will disarm people and they'll start to have fun and engage in an emotional way because they'll feel safe. And that's a key component.
Produce wonder and awe. I love that at an event. So
most difficult thing a designer can do.
Theron, I'm going to leave it right there. I think that was a great close, a great way to kind of get back to the driveway here. So I appreciate you doing this, appreciate talking, love hearing a lot of the things you said. I enjoy this end of the business. I enjoy trying to understand how to best congregate people and deliver experience. And, naturally and honestly, you have a great knack for it. You know what you're doing. So it's cool to hear. I really enjoyed it.
I had so much fun. Thanks so much for the invitation. And I hope your audience takes away some great moments from our discussion.
I'm sure they will. All right, everybody. That's a wrap. Theron, thanks for doing this again. I really appreciate it. We'll catch you next time. Thank you so much.